Why is President Biden sending American personnel into Ukraine now? No, it's not US soldiers hitting the battlefield. Instead, this decision marks a bold new chapter in the ongoing war. For the first time, US military contractors are heading directly into Ukraine, not to fight, but to keep Western weapons in top shape. It's a move that raises questions. Is this a game changer for Ukraine's defense against Russia? How will Putin react now that America's involvement is stepping closer to the action? Stay tuned as we break down what this decision means for the war, Ukraine's military strategy, and the broader geopolitical stakes. The simple answer is that it doesn't. On November 8th, CNN published a full report on the Biden administration's decision to allow American personnel into Ukraine. It called the decision the lifting of a de facto ban, though that ban applied to a group other than American soldiers. It's US military contractors that will be making their way into Ukraine. Those contractors are likely going to be primarily maintenance and repair personnel Ukraine can use to keep some of its strongest Western weapons in good condition. CNN says that particular focus will be placed on the F-16s due to arrive in Ukraine throughout 2025. The contractors will also help to keep Ukraine's Patriot anti-air missile batteries in good condition, essential given how useful the Patriot system has been in Ukraine's defense so far. The new ruling essentially allows US defense contractors to act in much the same way as they do in the United States. The Pentagon will provide contracts, likely with direct input from Zelensky and his associates, for work that Ukraine requires on its existing arsenal of weapons. Contractors can tender bids on these contracts, with those who win being allowed to send people into Ukraine to complete the work. It seems simple on paper, but it's a policy change that will send shockwaves through Russia. If Putin had hoped that his meat grinder approach to the war would lead to the weapons Ukraine receives wearing out, Biden's latest move puts a dampener on his plans. This move will speed up maintenance and perhaps ensure it's completed to a higher standard, allowing Ukraine to make better use of its Western-provided weapons. A White House defense official expanded the roles the US contractors will play in Ukraine. These contractors will be located far from the front lines, and they will not be fighting Russian forces, the official said. They will help Ukrainian armed forces rapidly repair and maintain US-provided equipment as needed so it can quickly be returned to the front lines. So Ukraine isn't going to be getting US soldiers to supplement its forces as it battles Russia in Kursk or the Donbass. Zelensky may be disappointed, though surely unsurprised by that fact. But what Ukraine is getting is the most knowledgeable support staff he could have hoped for when it comes to keeping its Western-supplied weapons online. After all, the contractors who are most likely to bid on the Pentagon's Ukraine-focused contracts are likely to come either from the manufacturers of the weapons Ukraine uses or companies that already provide maintenance for those weapons. Think of it as a way for Ukraine to introduce more structure into its maintenance routines. Rather than having to muddle along with second-hand knowledge gleaned from weapons manufacturers, it'll be working with contractors who know precisely what they're doing. Ukraine also gets its hands on much-needed technical expertise. That's especially the case with its F-16s and Patriot missile batteries. Both are highly advanced systems, using far more computerized technology than the Soviet-era weapon systems Ukraine used before Russia invaded. Ukraine has done a great job of learning how these systems work in direct operational and strategic senses, but maintenance is a different prospect, especially when it comes to F-16s. Those planes require up to 33 maintenance man-hours per flying hour, from crews that can number between 8 and 14 members, according to the American Security Project. Those are hours and personnel Ukraine can ill afford to spend when it needs every available person fighting on the front lines. Of course, those personnel also require specific training to become familiar with the platforms they're maintaining. All of that wasted time will go away when American contractors start arriving in Ukraine, because the contractors have more experience and greater levels of technical expertise. In short, Ukraine can focus on deploying its weapons effectively, while US contractors ensure they stay in top condition. The timing of this decision invites discussion. Since the war began in February 2022, American-made weapons have been central to Ukraine's defense efforts. The decision to send contractors into Ukraine now marks a significant shift in US strategy, reflecting the changing dynamics of the conflict and the urgent need to maintain advanced systems like F-16s and Patriot missile batteries on the battlefield. Earlier, US hesitation stemmed from concerns about escalating the conflict, particularly with Russia's frequent rhetoric about crossing red lines. However, as the war has progressed, the US has refined its strategy, increasing support while carefully navigating these boundaries. Since the war's beginning, Putin's red lines have been a key feature of his propaganda, portraying any significant Western aid to Ukraine as a trigger for severe Russian retaliation. Early examples of these supposed red lines included military aid to Ukraine and NATO's expansion to include Sweden and Finland. Despite Russia's warnings, the US and its allies pressed forward, crossing those lines without provoking the catastrophic responses Putin threatened. Now, one of the most contentious red lines involves Ukraine's potential use of long-range weapons like Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles against targets inside Russia. While the US has stood firm in its refusal to authorize such strikes, it continues to bolster Ukraine's capabilities with advanced systems, balancing strategic restraint with robust support. These threats from Putin, including veiled hints at nuclear retaliation, underscore the high stakes of US involvement. Yet, the Biden administration's calculated actions highlight its commitment to empowering Ukraine while avoiding unnecessary escalation. But what about Putin's own escalations? Kursk provides a stark example of how far he's willing to go. Following his signing of a cooperative defense pact with North Korea in June 2024, Putin brought between 11,000 and 12,000 North Korean soldiers into Russia. These troops are now part of a 50,000-strong counteroffensive in Kursk, showing that Putin has taken the Ukraine war to a level that directly involves another nation. The US obviously paid attention to this. Reports of North Koreans arriving in Russia stem back to mid-October 2024. It's likely no coincidence that the Biden administration made its decision less than a month after those reports came out. Putin has already elevated the conflict beyond what many anticipated he would. Perhaps the US has chosen now to send its contractors because it knows that Putin can no longer argue that any overseas government-approved personnel arriving in Ukraine represents the crossing of a red line. He already crossed that line when he started using North Korean soldiers to fight against Ukraine. America's logic is simple. It's following Putin over that line, albeit not to the point where it's providing soldiers to Ukraine. Still, the message is clear. If Putin is bringing in people from other countries, he's opened the door for Ukraine to do the same thing. Which brings us to perhaps the most important question we'll ask in this video. What does this all mean for Ukraine? We've covered some of the answers already. Having American contractors and specialists in Ukraine means the country's American-provided weapons last longer and are repaired faster than they otherwise would have been. Neither is good for Putin. He banks on wearing Ukraine's defenses down with his meat grinder strategy. The prospect of Ukraine's weapons lasting longer and being returned to the field faster means Russia is inevitably going to lose even more soldiers. That's rough news for Putin to take, given that the war has already cost him over 716,000 people to death and injury. The move also reduces Ukraine's reliance on other NATO countries to handle repairs. As CNN reports, whenever Ukraine's US-made weapons get damaged, they have to be shipped out of the country. The weapons spend days on the road heading to places like Poland and Romania, where they're repaired before being shipped back, spending even more time on the road as they return to war-torn Ukraine. It's a lengthy process that isn't without risks. There's always a chance that Russia will be able to strike a weapon while it's prone and in transit within Ukraine. The US has tried to help with basic maintenance before. American troops often hold video calls with their Ukrainian counterparts to walk them through basic repairs, but that was never enough for systems like the Patriot or F-16, meaning transporting those weapons around was a must. Not anymore. Much of the speed increase that comes from Biden's decision comes down to Ukraine not having to put its weapons on the road when they need maintenance. They can be fixed inside Ukraine, which also happens to reduce the risk of Russia managing to strike those weapons because they no longer have to go through a transportation process that leaves them vulnerable. There's another major boon that having US contractors inside Ukraine delivers: knowledge. We don't mean knowledge in the sense that contractors understand the US-made equipment to the point they can repair it faster here, though that is true. Rather, the knowledge that those contractors have is transferable. Ukraine has to send its damaged weapons to other countries because there aren't enough people inside Ukraine who know how to fix them. With the arrival of US contractors comes an opportunity for Ukraine's engineers and soldiers to learn about their weapons directly from people who understand how they work. Ukraine's military is going to a new type of school. It's almost guaranteed that Ukraine will be smart enough to have many of its people watching and learning as the contractors get to work. A single contractor could spawn several Ukrainians capable of fixing weapons without the contractor's help. In short, Ukraine has a massive opportunity to upskill its military here, and it's almost certain to take every advantage of that lucky break. Then there's perhaps the most important aspect of what this all means for Ukraine. It shows the US is actively trying to give the country the upper hand in its war with Russia. Until now, the United States government has helped from the sidelines with massive donations of military equipment. It hasn't gotten directly involved in the Ukraine war in any capacity outside of occasional video conferencing calls to help Ukrainian soldiers understand their weapons. Granted, there were American contractors in Ukraine already, but all of these were private employees. Biden's new policy means that the US government is actively getting involved from now on. This move suggests that the US believes in something Ukraine presented to it back in October 2024, Ukraine's victory plan. We don't know everything about this plan yet, outside of the fact that it contains 5 major points and a trio of secret annexes, according to Politico. But we do know that Zelensky believes that the successful implementation of his plan depends as much on Ukraine's partners as it does on Ukraine itself. He said as much when presenting his plan to Ukraine's parliament, stating, "This plan can be implemented. It depends on the partners. It certainly does not depend on Russia." There are some elements of the plan that aren't likely to happen during the war. Ukraine says that it needs to become a member of NATO, which would lead to the triggering of Article 5 of the NATO Charter and the direct involvement of every other NATO member in the war against Russia. That isn't going to happen, at least while the war is ongoing. But what can happen is the part of the plan that calls for Ukraine to receive more weapons at a faster rate than ever before. The US allowing government contractors to enter Ukraine boosts this part of Zelensky's victory plan. Those contractors may not be providing weapons themselves, but they do offer personnel who speed up the repairs of the weapons Ukraine already has. And who's to know, maybe this major step by the US is the first of many that will see other personnel enter Ukraine over time. But as with any bold move, there are challenges to consider. One key factor is the potential for shifts in US policy, with presidential-elect Donald Trump taking office in January 2025. Trump has expressed confidence in his ability to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, which may lead to adjustments in strategy. However, regardless of the administration, the US's commitment to strengthening Ukraine's position and supporting NATO has been a cornerstone of its approach to countering Russian aggression. Right now, it's hard to tell what direction future policies may take. What is clear is that the strength of NATO and US-led initiatives has played a vital role in keeping Ukraine's defense robust. Even amidst evolving discussions on funding and contributions, the alliance's unity remains a critical deterrent against further Russian escalation. But what will happen if this alliance does indeed change? The US no longer being a part of NATO means it'll be acting more independently than ever before when it comes to its policies on Ukraine. There will be less NATO-led pressure to help, to donate, to send governmental contractors into a war zone to keep Ukraine's equipment running. Speaking of those contractors, there's also a risk factor to consider. The defense official who announced the policy change made an important point about the risk of government contractors sending their employees to Ukraine. Each US contractor, organization, or company will be responsible for the safety and security of their employees, said the official. That means it's up to the bidders to create their own risk mitigation strategies, which have to be included as part of their bids. That presents a problem. It's one thing to have a new policy that allows American contractors to make their way into Ukraine, but it's quite another to convince those contractors that heading into a war zone, albeit behind the front lines, is good for them. There's a chance that some contractors either won't bid on the Ukraine contracts at all due to the risk involved, or if they do, will demand higher prices than expected to account for the risk. That could scupper Biden's plans before they even get off the ground. Those contractors need to be paid, and they'll likely get their money out of the cash the US has earmarked for Ukraine already. Despite these issues, America taking such a bold step is big news in the wider context of the war. It's a move that shows Putin that the US is still taking the prospect of a Ukrainian victory seriously. Plus, American contractors in Ukraine means more weapons stay on the battlefield for longer, a devastating blow for Putin as he relies on his attritional strategies to whittle away at Ukraine's defenses. But what do you think about President Biden's new policy and the impact that it'll have on the war? Will contractors be keen to send some of their most talented people into Ukraine, and will the contracts be attractive enough to convince them to do so? What happens when President-elect Trump gets into office? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.